Joan of Arc was living today, she'd probably just get prescribed a low-dose antipsychotic and live a fulfilled and happy life. But she lived in the 1400s, so she just got her shit rocked by ugly, unwashed men until they burnt her alive. Welcome to the story of Joan of Arc. Joan was born in January of 1412 to a peasant family in the north of France. Her education was pretty pitiful. She never learned how to read or write, but she did have that notorious farm kid strength from working/helping on the family farm. And of course, like any medieval woman, Joan's mother made sure to just push the Catholic Church right down Joan's neck. And keep in mind, this is 1400s France, so shit is absolutely bananas. Joan is born during the back half of the 100 Years' War, conflict that Joan herself would one day become an icon of. And as the story unfolds, it becomes really clear just how much growing up war-torn really affected Joan of Arc and molded her into the person she is. And it's a pretty symbiotic relationship because Joan would go on to mold the war in return. And if you don't know what the 100 Years' War is, let me give you the quickest refresher I can. So let's go all the way back to King Charles IV of France dropping dead without a male heir in 1328, and he left the throne to his cousin. But hold on, because Charles IV might not have had any sons, but his sister Isabella had a son, who would technically be a closer blood relative than the cousin he appointed. So naturally, the throne would go to his nephew, right? Wrong. Silly goose, because his sister Isabella was actually married off into England, and her son, the 15-year-old Edward III, is now the King of England. And a lot of the French nobility were like, I would rather go down to the Gap and swallow a pair of jeans than let the English king inherit the French crown. Plus, France had this little clause about not letting claims to the throne be through a woman. So this whole thing is pretty sloppy, but when the dust settles, it is Cousin Phil running France and nephew Edward running England. And everyone's being pretty cool about it in the beginning until France decides to go goblin mode and attack for territory that was previously won and held by the English. And so the English king is like, hey, screw you, France, and actually give me your throne, you friggin' idiot. And then they fought for 100 years about it. England doing a lot better than France at the start because they had bows and arrows and shit, but eventually France would go scorched earth on the English to even it out. And then it hits a lull and the two kingdoms just kind of like grumble at each other for a long time because they have so much civil unrest within their own kingdoms that they actually can't fight each other that much. Everybody's son was on some sort of tyrant bullshit, and the leadership is just a revolving door of whack jobs in France for a little while. So by the time our girl Joan of Arc is born in 1412, France sucks ass. Crazy diseases, poor quality of life, war everywhere. Because on top of fighting the English, they are also having a civil war in France, and this war shit is nuts, because back then they had to wear those ugly Transformers costumes. And like I was saying, everyone in leadership is dying either of conflict or disease, because these men are deeply unserious. Eventually, both of these kingdoms that have been in conflict for 100 years are now left to the same baby. But because of all the civil unrest, Boss Baby is not gonna fly in France. And Prince Charles, the Dauphin of France, is like, hold up, I am the dead king's oldest son. I should be the king of France. Not some little English guy who can't even eat solids yet. I'm gonna fight that dumb stupid baby. What am I talking about? That's essentially the 100 Years' War. Anyway, little Joan is growing up in this mess, and it's making her a little kooky. As a child, Joan heard voices in her head and convinced herself that that was not a trauma symptom of living during a horrific civil war, and instead the visions and voices were actually heavenly saints that were sent to guide her. And these heavenly beings apparently had a very limited human scope because they didn't tell her any divine secrets, but they did encourage her to participate in risky behavior, namely fighting off the English to restore power to Charles, the Dauphin of France. So she really believes the angels are telling her to suit up and go to battle. And by the time she's 17, she has everyone convinced that she's talking to interdimensional angels telepathically. And she tries to convince the military to take her to Charles so she can advise him on God's plan. And at first the military's like, piss off, freak. But when she starts correctly predicting battle outcomes, they start to be like, huh. That's a little bit weird. We're actually going to take you to Charles and figure all this out. But the trip is actually crazy dangerous, so they dress her up like a man, cut her hair short Mulan style, and truck her crazy ass across the countryside. But here's what's crazy about the whole thing. For years, there has been an urban legend of sorts that an armored maiden from the Lorraine region would pop out and show them, and rescue France from its invaders. And Joan, being from that region, either heard this lore and adopted it into her delusions, or maybe it was all divine. Who knows? Who honestly cares? But Joan is out there doing the damn thing. And when the soldiers are asking her why she's doing this, she's like, babe, I am only walking my bald ass across enemy territory because God is demanding I do this. I don't want to be doing all this labor. Because all of this was just because she truly felt compelled by God to save France. Eventually, they get to the court of Delphine Charles, and he thinks she's a fucking whack job. He's understandably a little suspicious of the little girl they just brought him that can speak to angels and is gonna win wars for him. But Joan's determined, and her story is just ramping up. And if you'd like to know the trickery and bullshit that the Delphine will put Joan through, as well as the insane series of events that follow, then make sure you leave me a comment so I can use it for the next video. And I'll see you in the next one, for when this little peasant girl really gets shit poppin'.